There are three kind of core settings that are at the heart of how all cameras work. These are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So the aperture is about how much light comes into the camera, and what that translates to is how much of the image you want in focus. You can have a very narrow amount of focus where, but that means that if you move towards or away from the lens much at all, you go out of focus, or you can have a large band of focus where you've got much more area to move. A great example would be, you've seen images with like a portrait image with a blurry background. That's quite a narrow band of focus. But then you've seen landscape images where the whole image is beautifully crisp. That's a wide band of focus. The second one is shutter speed. Shutter speed is how quickly the camera iris opens and closes when you take a photo. In short, that boils down to how much light you let in. If it opens and closes very quickly, you let in very little light. But obviously, if it stays open quite a while, then you will let in a lot of light. The way that really impacts photos and video is how it captures movement. Now, a very, very fast shutter speed will freeze movement when it takes the image, whereas a much slower speed will you'll start to see an amount of blur. I love getting a really crisp photo of something like a veil hanging in the air while the dancer's moving, or their skirt as they're turning. It can really be a really beautiful image. But sometimes you want to capture or convey an amount of movement, or the dancer's moving. And you do that by allowing the camera to capture a little or a small amount of motion blur. So perhaps the fringes of a skirt as the dancer turns, or something like that. So knowing about your shutter speed helps you kind of know what you're aiming for. Obviously, as a performer where you're moving around, you really want quite a high shutter speed, so you're not just blurred on your video all the time. So it's just handy to know about kind of how it works. The last one is ISO. Now, to avoid getting into complications of and details, let's just say this translates as image quality. And what a camera can do is it can degrade your image quality if it cannot get enough light to take a higher quality photo. And you'll see that a lot with webcams and phones. If there's not enough light, then you will see the image become grainy or even blocky as the camera tries to get an image, even if there isn't enough light, by degrading the quality of the photo. So how does this help you? Well, the first thing to know is these three settings are linked. If you change one, you are forced to change the other two. And most modern cameras do all of this for you. But for example, if you're trying to capture a high-speed shot and you want effectively a high shutter speed, then you're going to have to change the settings in terms of aperture and ISO. But all three revolve around the amount of light coming into the camera. So if you need a minimum level of light to capture a photograph, but if you're turning your shutter speed up full, you are limiting the amount of light coming in, so you must have a large aperture size. But even then, you may not be able to get enough light, so you have to degrade your image quality to still capture the image. So by knowing these things that are linked, and knowing that they are related to the amount of light that the camera gets in, this helps you kind of, even if you can't change the settings on the phones themselves, which is unfortunately the case in a lot of modern devices, which are designed to be as easy to use as possible, so you don't have to get into all of that, the nuances. It still helps you to understand, because you know that all of it's based around light, so you can kind of overcome some of it by just making sure there's enough light in the area you're taking your photos, because it means there's more flexibility in your choice of settings. If you're a performer, you know you're going to need a relatively high shutter speed because you're going to be moving. And you want to keep capture of that movement, and you don't want to be too badly blurred. So by keeping plenty of light in your area while you're performing, you really help the camera deal with and give it more room in which to work those other settings around and try and give you a better quality image. Particularly if you can stop it degrading the image quality to try and keep capturing the footage, then that's your main goal.